Time is a river. Its countless tributaries stretch into infinity. I have stalked its shores for millennia, a lone sentinel watching as currents of magic crash through reality unfettered, and mana ebbed and flowed like the tides. I was there when the world fell into shadow, when it forgot its true nature, when arcane light seemed extinguished forever, like a lonely candle sputtering out in a shroud of ever-widening, ever-oppressive darkness. And I was there when the world remembered all it had forgotten, when dragons rose from their ancient slumber, and the world shook with wonder and fear. When magic flowed once again from the earth, like a long-buried torrent. I watched humanity struggle to comprehend what their ancestors had always known, that reality is far more vast and terrible than their science could ever fathom, could ever hope to measure. Throughout it all, through the long and endless aeons, I maintained my vigil, neither fully of this world, nor entirely separate from it. In my time, I have been known by many names: Guardian, Watcher, Keeper of the ancient ways. But mostly, these days, I am known as Rufus. And this is Harriet. She is, as humans go, rather unusual, which, given all I have experienced of humans over the centuries, is truly saying something. For one, she is convinced that every cat she has ever adopted has been a powerful spirit. Vice President Whiskers, Commandant Fuzzy Britches, the Great and Terrible Steve, Dr. Marmalade, Lois, Sir Daddy, Dr. Marmalade 2, Meowpuss, Ariana Grande, the cat. All of them, she adamantly insisted, were mystical beings of profound arcane knowledge and eldritch power. They were not. Vice President Whiskers was particularly ordinary, his sole mystical achievement being the ability to sleep 22 hours per day. And while historically similar to the daily habits of most vice presidents, was not in any way an indication of an awakened nature. That was an intentional pun. Feel free to chortle. After a few centuries of observing humanity, you learn to recognize those rare souls who view the world differently. Sometimes they are powerful mages, sometimes they are simply mad, and sometimes they are both. I suppose that is why I decided to remain here, to remain with Harriet. After ages of watching the grand designs of dragons, immortals, and secret societies, there is something rather refreshing about someone who genuinely believes that offering tea to street doctors helps maintain the cosmic balance. The funny thing is, she may be right. But perhaps I should start this tale at the beginning instead of in medias res. You see, throughout history, there are moments when power, intention, and sheer human obstinance collide, in particularly volatile ways. These nexus points tend to manifest around objects of significance, boxes, books, on occasion a rather suspicious and bawdy erotica-festooned teapot. The object itself is rarely the true source of power. It is merely the focal point, around which chaos chooses to coalesce. I am drawn to these convergences, not by choice. It is something approaching a compulsion, perhaps, something so tied to my very being, to my very essence itself, that I find them irresistible, as though they were some giant, glimmering, laser twine ball made of catnip and smelling of rotting tuna. Yes, it is enough to say that I am drawn to them. It is simply what I am, what I have always been, a witness, sometimes a participant, offering a gentle nudge in a less catastrophic direction. Though I must note that humanity has a remarkable talent for finding catastrophe, regardless of which direction they are nudged. In 1261, it manifested as a jade puzzle box. In 1543, a lacquered chest. In 1876, a peculiarly specific hat box. These nexuses seem to enjoy manifesting as various boxes, but they have appeared as any number of non-box items. A rare issue of a 1980s Hungarian pornographic magazine is something that comes to mind, though we simply do not have the time to dive into that seedy debacle. And now, well, here we are again, presented with not one, but two boxes of significance. The universe, it seems, has developed a sense of humor. 1. A Japanese puzzle box, stolen from a strange, lonely collector man, before it could ever reach his strange, lonely collection. 2. A case containing what humans charmingly refer to as a nuclear football. Though I see neither nuclear materials nor anything resembling a football, the nomenclature continues to perplex me. The true focal point of this particular convergence remains unclear. Perhaps it is one, perhaps it is both, perhaps it is neither, and we are all being rather dramatically misdirected. Though I must admit, the presence of multiple boxes of potentially catastrophic significance does add a certain spice to the situation. One might wonder how a being such as myself, a singular entity who has witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations, observed countless nexus points of reality-altering significance, and seen patterns that would mire lesser minds in the malevolent marshes of madness, came to reside with a street witch who names spirits after weather patterns and insists on trading mundane world gossip with ravens. As with the best answers, it is at once complicated and yet surprisingly simple. You see, after centuries of observing these convergences, one begins to notice certain regularities, statistical improbabilities that occur with suspicious frequency, coincidences that feel rather intentionally coincidental. I was contemplating one such pattern in 2071, manifesting as a rather peculiar repetition in the local mana nodes, when I first observed Harriet engaged in what she called redistributing cosmic harmony, which primarily consisted of offering tea to a raccoon she had mistaken for a chaos spirit. The raccoon, I should note, was indeed just a raccoon, though it did display a remarkable appreciation for Earl Grey. Insisted on drinking it with milk, however. Dreadful things, though I suppose one cannot change one's nature, especially when one is a raccoon. What caught my attention was not her mistake. I had seen countless humans misidentify magical phenomena over the centuries, and it was, indeed, not even the first mistake I had observed Harriet making in the 5 or 10 minutes I'd been watching her. No. What intrigued me was that despite her complete misunderstanding of what she was seeing, she was somehow achieving exactly the effect she intended. The local mana flows were indeed stabilizing, though not for any of the reasons she believed. It was fascinating, like watching someone solve a complex equation by using entirely incorrect methods, yet somehow arriving correctly at the precise right answer, time and again. Perhaps that is why I stayed. In a world of increasingly predictable patterns, Harriet remains genuinely unpredictable. Though, I suspect she would insist it is because I am an ancient spirit of profound wisdom. I am not certain which interpretation I prefer. After the raccoon incident, I simply remained in her vicinity. She would leave offerings of food, initially referring to me as Count Emmerich Piece of Cheese. I did not correct her, though I wanted to. More than the universe wishes to expand until it can do so no longer. When she finally adopted me, though I would argue the inverse is more accurate, she declared me Rufus, keeper of arcane secrets. The latter part was unnecessary, though not entirely incorrect, I suppose. The intervening years have been interesting. We have had our share of adventures, though Harriet would likely categorize our pursuit of a rogue water elemental through the Redmond sewers as aggressive feng shui adjustment, rather than the far-reaching and harrowing municipal crisis it actually was. But this current situation began with a raven. Well, it was no mere raven for starters, though to save time and energy we can use that simplified designation. I had observed the raven for several days, quite unlike the others that Harriet regularly anthropomorphized. No, this one's aura was deliberately conspicuous, like someone wearing a bespoke suit to a street fight. I do not typically chase birds. It is beneath my dignity. I prefer to maintain a more professional relationship with the local fauna. However, this raven, let us say that when one has observed pattern convergences for as long as I have, one develops a certain sensitivity to their precipitating factors. The bird was, to use the modern parlance, bait. Obviously so, practically radiating significance. I would have preferred to approach the situation with more subtlety. Perhaps an elegant series of coincidences leading Harriet in the correct direction. But, well, you can imagine how that might go. Sometimes one must simply chase a bird. The rest is what the rest is. And so, after a long, though not uneventful bus ride, we found ourselves outside the repurposed library in the unimaginatively named Barrens, where I was forced to observe what appeared to be the universe's latest attempt at dramatic irony. First, there was Charles. Chuck, as he insists on being called. His vehicle troubles remind me of the transition from horse-drawn carriages to steam engines. The same deep-seated anxiety about change masked by technical expertise. Though I must say, at least the horses rarely required quite so much percussive maintenance. Regardless, Chuck is most certainly one of the good ones, as they, whomever they are, say. Then we have Sal. His corporate mannerisms are remarkably similar to those I observed in the court of Louis XIV. The same carefully crafted charm, though with considerably better dental hygiene, and all of it taken to an extraordinarily elven artifice and delicacy. In my experience, anyone who smiles that convincingly while discussing potential death typically has several contingency plans already in motion. As for Na-He, her military bearing reminded me initially of countless soldiers I have observed throughout history. However, there is something different. Her wolf guardian spirit, for instance. While I generally maintain a professional distance from canine entities, I must admit her spiritual guide displays an admirable sense of duty for a wolf. However, I find myself unusually concerned with her well-being. Perhaps it is because I have seen how those whom the wolf favors are sometimes led into a thermopylae of self-sacrifice, all in service to the pack. As for Harriet, she was, as usual, simultaneously missing the obvious and accidentally stumbling upon profound metaphysical truths. Sometimes I wonder if she's actually aware of more than she appears to be. Other times I watch her try to persuade pigeons to join her book club. Then there was the auteur. I have seen his type before. Throughout history, there are always those who style themselves as architects of fate, while simultaneously being pieces on someone else's board. His perfectly maintained German accent, the silver pocket watch that practically hums with old magic, the calculated presentation of wealth that speaks of resources without revealing their source. Even his choice of runners is interesting. A fallen corporate executive, a washed-out military specialist, a street witch who converses with inanimate objects, and a rigger whose relationship with his current vehicle could best be described as actively antagonistic. Either this is a masterpiece of strategic assembly, or, well, as Harriet would say, the universe does enjoy its little jokes. Throughout my centuries of observing Nexus points, I have noticed that they tend to cluster. Like cosmic dominoes waiting to fall, each convergence draws others to it. The events of the previous day and a half have proved no exception. I suppose it was all rather inevitable. These Nexus points tend to draw people in like moths to a flame, though in this case the flame appears to be a rather theatrical troll king, with a penchant for gladiatorial combat and questionable interior decorating choices. To see all these threads now converging here, contemplating two boxes of very different sorts of trouble. The universe does enjoy its little ironies, almost as much as it enjoys watching humans make increasingly complicated decisions about increasingly simple problems. Downstairs, the king dances among his subjects, his aura indeed resembling a thunderstorm wrapped in silk, as Harriet so poetically observed. In the subway tunnels, our associates Mr. Charles and Mr. Sal have discovered quite a predicament. Explosive charges left by rival gangs looking to bring the king's palace down on his and everyone's heads. Do they co-opt the charges for their own use? Or do they disarm them? And here, in the treasury, I observed Ms. Nahi demonstrate what I believe humans call mixed feelings about the nuclear football. Her aura indeed resembles storm clouds, as I mentioned to Harriet, though perhaps I should have specified that they are the kind of clouds that bring both nurturing rain and devastating lightning. The complexity is a subtle one and quite fascinating. On a related side note, I never liked that scruffy Tara gang woman and was quite happy with the way Nahi electrocuted her into a stupor, then hog-tied and booby-trapped her in a footlocker. This is something upon which the wolf spirit and I heartily agree. Harriet, bless her scattered soul, continues to provide inadvertently accurate magical support while still believing she is filming some manner of adult historical documentary. I have found it best not to correct her misconceptions. After all, I spent 3 years as Count Emmerich Piece of Cheese before she settled on Rufus. One learns to pick one's battles. The two boxes present an interesting philosophical conundrum. One contains puzzles meant to be solved. The other contains solutions that perhaps should remain puzzling. In my experience, humans tend to make the wrong choice in such matters about 78.4% of the time. Part of that is an inability to strip such choices down to their essence. To wit, Ms. Nahi sees one box as payment for a job well done, leading to more such jobs and more payments, while the other box represents a cost incurred for the transaction of choosing idealism over pragmatism. She may not be wrong, but then again, having observed countless similar moments throughout history, I have found that right and wrong are rather fluid, more a matter of opinion than actual substance. Though I suppose if one must make difficult choices, it helps to have combat stimulants making one's aura strobe quite so enthusiastically. Conversely, choosing to knowingly and willingly battle a guardian air spirit directly, no matter how intoxicated you are, feels on the incorrect and/or wrong side of decisions one might make, from a value judgment perspective, of course. In all my long centuries of observing these nexus points, I have noticed that the most significant moments often disguise themselves as choices. Two boxes, two paths, two possible futures diverging from a single point in time. I suppose I should wake Harriet from her trance attempting to enter the 1984 anime cell as though it were a gateway to another dimension. After all, we do seem to be approaching what humans would call the good part. Though in my experience, the good part often devolves into the bad part rather quickly and unceremoniously. Ultimately, I go forward knowing that no matter what happens, no matter what choices are made, and no matter what consequences and effects are unleashed, I will be completely and totally fine. My companions, on the other hand? Interestingly, I am reminded of an old Mesopotamian saying, "The gods write the best jokes in disappearing ink." Those Mesopotamians wielded quite the wit, didn't they? Yes, indeed. Oh my. Though I suspect none of my companions would appreciate that particular piece of wisdom right now. Would they?